Let's continue. Well, last time I was mentioning that there were other problems in addition to the Great Depression that has actually created problems in the world economic system. And one of them was actually collapse of the gold standard. Um, Before World War II, countries, not all countries, but major countries, were all guaranteeing to give a certain amount of their money in return to a certain amount of gold. For example, it is something like if you bring 1 kilogram of gold, the central bank of Turkey guarantees you to give, let's say, 1,000 Turkish lira. And that guarantee is fixed. So unless the central bank makes another announcement, you are able to get that money when you come to the central bank of the Turkey. This was the case for the major world countries. United States was actually one of the last countries which had actually a kind of a mixed standard. They don't guarantee to give a certain amount of gold, but a certain amount of gold and a certain amount of silver together should be brought to get the dollar. And then the system has changed, and at the turn of the century, again, United States also begin to guarantee to return the dollar only, exchange dollar only to gold. I mean, not to a certain amount of gold and a certain amount of silver, but they start to give just gold in return to gold dollar. Of course, more gold in that case. And that was one of the basic discussions in the United States, because the amount of dollar you can have in the economic system very much depends on the amount of your reserves. And if you exchange dollar for only gold, gold and silver, you have a higher reserve. The money you have is dependent on the amount of gold you have plus amount of silver you have. But when you have just a gold standard, then basically the amount of gold you have will be only thing that matters. So since the value of the gold you have will be less compared with the amount of gold and silver you have, the money you have in the economic system will be relatively smaller in that case, because you need to make sure that you are able to pay back the money. You should decrease the money you have in the economic system. But that creates deflation. If you have less money, then the value of the value of the goods and services will decrease, and deflation has harmed in the United States. In that case, small farmers, many of them have collapsed, actually go bankrupt. But anyway, this gold system has collapsed in the whole world in 1914. That was one of the legacies of World War I. Why? Because many countries needed to make excessive spendings for their military, so they were not able to pay that money. They didn't have enough gold reserves for making all these payments, and also they were also not able to print enough money, sufficient money, if they will continue to promise to transform this money to gold whenever people require it, because if people actually require it, they don't have enough gold reserves. So what they do is they said, okay, we stop giving gold in return to our national monies like pound or franc, instead, or mark, for example. Instead, we will reopen. We will continue to transform our national monies, national currencies to the gold after the war, and they hoped they will get sufficient amount of payments from the losing country, so that they will be able to get sufficient level of gold reserve to be able to give people who want to transform their pounds or francs to gold sufficient level of gold. So they closed it and they printed a lot of francs, a lot of sterlings in case of United Kingdom. But at the end of the war, Germany itself was also bankrupt. So they were not able to find sufficient gold reserves to run the gold standard system again. So gold standard system collapsed, and the main result is, of course, previously gold standards create some stability in the international monetary system, because you can transform your mark to gold, go to the France, and then transform your gold to the franc, and the ratios are more or less stable. They are stable as long as central banks don't change them. But now that kind of stability did not exist, and the value of the national currencies were changing a lot, especially after the Great Depression, when countries started to print the money. So, well, getting a debt in a foreign currency, or receiving a payment from a foreign currency, or promising to make a payment from an input provider you have for your factory, for example, to make a payment in foreign currency become extremely risky thing to do, because you don't know how the prices will fluctuate. So that has actually make international trade also to contract. And then you have the famous Dust Bowl in the United States. Actually, this was one of the several environmental problems in the world. One also was happening also in the Soviet Union, also the famous famine, basically. Dust Bowl is basically in United States. Actually, in Denver, there's a museum where you can experience it, experience how it was felt. So basically, in order to make the farming more efficient, they had actually dig the ground, and they opened a deep, kind of holes deep into the soil, so that they can make the watering more efficiently, and they can also use the pesticides more efficiently. And they also stripped the land of forests. In the end, what happened was, in 1920s, suddenly, when the wind was going, I mean, the area is called Great Plains, and now previously Great Plains had this the grass and some additional plants like trees. Now it didn't have anything except the crops, the agricultural crops. And when the wind was going through it, it was able to take the earth with it. So enormous dust clouds were formed, and those dust clouds hit the agricultural areas and cities even. And the whole cars were sometimes buried under dust. And I mean, when it hit to the cities, for example, the buildings were just moving back and forth as if it was an earthquake. So it was a very big event. It was a very when Dust Bowl hit your town, that was a very big event by itself. But in addition to that, it also damaged the agricultural production significantly, and that was the time when you also had this Great Depression. The industry itself was also collapsed. Now the land itself was also collapsing, and then you have communism in the USSR. For anyone who was living in the capitalist economic system, communism in the USSR was something that was not so pleasant to be polite. I mean, previously, the system was functioning because large sections of the society were accepting it, and you had people who were economically or politically at the head of the system, relatively. But people who were not at the head, who were workers, largely workers, some of them peasants, and at least the development was through that way. They were also well, some of them were challenging the system, but a significant portion of them were also accepting the system, or not at least want to challenge the systems in strong way. There were some events in 19th century, but up to 1917, basically the countries were able to contain them. But in 1970, suddenly, in a major country of the world, the workers and peasants together starts to challenge the system in a significant way, and they have built a country which was aiming to have a completely different economic system. That was a big challenge to the existing economic system, and that big challenge was realized in that way. Um, right in 1917 and 18, before war was ended, even many of the former allies of Russia was um, uh, aiming to challenge both the regime there and aim to build the old Tsarist regime again, or something similar. And the regime need to fight up all the way up to 1920s with foreign powers to basically establish its rule. But in the end, it was able to stabilize its rule in USSR. And immediately, of course, USSR called itself as a regime that was actually kind of was a regime of all workers in the world. And so the question whether other workers in other different parts of the world might challenge system in their countries in a similar way, that was a big and very important question by itself, which becomes suddenly more realistic question in Europe and in United States, especially in countries with sufficiently developed workers' population, but also in some other countries, this challenge was felt, for example, in China, for example, and in some Latin American countries. So, under all of these circumstances, well, economic system has become more or less open to alternative views. One current, which was kind of make its ideas heard before that also, but before 1914 also. But after 1914, suddenly they become more active and their ideas were more in the mainstream political and to some extent economic framework also. In capitalist countries, I don't say in the socialist countries. In socialist countries, they didn't like them that much because it was thought that solutions within capitalism is not wasn't something worth to discuss. So that group was social democrats, and social democrats, remember, they were thinking that the economic system needs to the capitalist economic system has the capacity to change and transform into a system that would basically favor or improve the workers' conditions. And in time, because capitalist system has this ability to this transformation, workers rather need to work within to make improvements within the capitalist system. Basically, try to exert social control over the existing economic system as much as possible, and make changes to improve their living standards. Welfare states or certain socialized socialized, I mean, certain state rights like the right to healthcare, right to education were within this framework. You might put them into this framework, which, I mean, the economic system organizes to provide a certain living standards to the workers, all workers basically, and welfare state is a way to do that. So, well, let's continue later to see the new currents that merge with the social democrat movement.